Hi, I'm Nicholas McGurr, author of The Afterlife and host for Stories in a Cemetery. You can find all my fiction works with themes of the afterlife on nicholasmcgurr.com. That's NicholasMcGirr.com. As a writer, I do research, and that research is more than likely inside a haunted location or a cemetery. Like you, I'm curious about the afterlife, and always looking for a new topic for my next book. I hope you enjoy this episode of my research as much as I did in using it for my fiction works. Let's get into today's story in the cemetery. Hey guys, welcome to episode 16 of Stories in the Cemetery. So this week I am discussing Byron Preiss's The Secret. If you've been listening to the show, you already know that this book has taken up quite a bit of my time. This week I've decided to interview Brian McFarland, owner of Charleston Cavalier Tours and local historian right here in Charleston, to discuss some of the already figured out aspects of the verses and the painting that is in the book. So if you're not familiar with Byron Preiss's The Secret, it is a book with 12 paintings and 12 verses that lead to a hidden treasure in 12 different cities. 3 out of the 12 have already been found, and it has already been revealed, I guess, or figured out, however we want to look at this, that one of the paintings refers to Charleston. This book was given to me by Brian, and he said this is going to be right up your alley. You guys know that I like to put clues together and take our EVPs and our clues from the spirit box and EMF detectors and put all the clues together to make sense of a puzzle. And that's exactly what this book is. Now, with this particular interview, we are not going to reveal the research that we have done. We do believe that we have a completely different location for the treasure than what has been stated and posted all over the blogs and YouTube videos. We have gone on a completely different path, and we are not going to reveal any of that until we are certain that we are really close. Now, I think we're close, but I don't think we're really close yet. But again, this is an interesting book. I wanted to discuss it. It has a lot of history to it. The book was written in 1982, again by Byron Preiss and a bunch of his friends, other writers and researchers and folks like that. But again, super interesting book. I hope you're going to enjoy this interview. Let's get through some housekeeping notes real quick before we get into the interview. I just want to say thanks to David and April for their support on buymeacoffee.com. If you'd like to support the show and my research, head over to buymeacoffee.com. Search for Nicholas McGurr, or I'll have a link in the show notes where you can pretty much buy me some cheap coffee. So for just $1 a month, you can actually support the show, Stories in a Cemetery, and my research, and you would also be greatly appreciated and mentioned on the show. Reviews, you can leave reviews and comments on several different places, depending on where you're listening from. You can leave comments on CastBox. So if you're listening to Stories in a Cemetery through CastBox, you can leave comments there. You can leave a review on Stitcher. So Stitcher, I know I have a lot of listeners that come through Stitcher. You can leave reviews on Apple Podcast. So that's, obviously the main source where you can actually leave comments and a star rating. Or you can actually leave me a voice message through anchor.fm. That's the host for this show, so the voice messages go straight to me in my inbox. If it's an interesting enough story, I will actually post it right here on the show. I do want to share one review that I got this past week. I want to say thanks to Snickers180. He says, or she says, because Snickers could be either way. I don't know, it could be a clown. Snickers is actually kind of a cool clown name. But anyway, he or she says, great show and very informative. Nicholas does a great job of researching his locations and telling a great story. Thanks, Snickers. That means a lot. Since I live in Charleston, I'm familiar with so many of the places he explores, but he's introduced me to a few more that I haven't visited. Give him a listen. 5-star review. Snickers, that's awesome. So kudos to you. I appreciate you, and thanks for continuing to listen to the show. Hopefully you will enjoy these secret Byron Preiss episodes. And guys, the plan for this, hopefully, is that at the beginning of every month, I'll give you an updated 1-hour episode where it'll tell you about how far along I am with the research into this book. So leave me some comments, go to the Facebook page, let me know if this is something you would like to hear more of, because of course it's an ongoing investigation and it has tangible evidence. So again, getting back to housekeeping, one last thing. Merch is still being developed. So, guys, nobody wants these shirts and hats and all this cool SITC stuff more than I do. So please be patient, as a couple of you have already inboxed me asking me when it will be released. So it is still being developed. It is December. It's busy for everybody. And guys, that's pretty much all I have. Let's get into today's interview right after this quick sponsor break. Hey guys, welcome to episode 16. I have with me today historian Brian McFarland. He is the owner of Charleston Cavalier Tours, the company that's in alliance with the Stories in the Cemetery ghost hunting experiences that I've been talking about for the past few weeks. We're going to dive into some of the history of Charleston today, but that only is because we are talking about Byron Preiss' The Secret, a treasure hunt book. So welcome to the show, Brian. Why don't you talk a little bit about Charleston Cavalier Tours?
Hello. I am Brian McFarland with Charleston Cavalier Tours. We try to provide tours for people that have passion and expertise. So one of the things I like to do is kind of just wander around downtown, and I noticed a couple of people with a book in their hands, and I talked to one of them, and then I quickly sent that over to Nick, and here we are, Nick.
So, yeah, thank you for this mind-boggling puzzle that you sent over. And with the things that I do with my blog and the podcast, and even the tours now, is put pieces of puzzles together. So this has been the ultimate puzzle. So for those folks that aren't familiar with Byron Preiss' book, The Secret, I will kind of give you a quick gist, but I'm guessing, since you're already listening to this, that it caught your attention because you are obviously a treasure hunter looking for this, or if you're just interested, you already know about it. But the book is very simple. It has kind of a fairy tale in the beginning, and then it goes into 12 paintings with 12 different verses. Those verses match up to one of the paintings in order to find a treasure. So the two together kind of make a map. The unfortunate thing is, and the puzzle within the puzzle, is that you have to find which verse goes to which painting. So I will say that it is pretty well figured out that the second picture in the book is the Charleston image. Would you agree with that, Brian?
It's hard to deny the peninsula shape and some of the more blatant visual cues that are definitely associated with Charleston, South Carolina.
So do you have the picture in front of you? Can you see it? Can we talk about some of the clues that you see?
Well, I like the picture just because of just the lion in it as just a appreciation of a graphical image, but you can definitely tell on what appears to be some kind of totem or mask, the golden that's right by the side of the lion. You can see the peninsula there, and if you've looked at some of the clues online, I mean, everyone pretty much identify. It's hard to get away from obviously the Ashley and the Cooper River on the left and the right.
Mm-hmm. I think my favorite part of this image that kind of gave me the aha moment was the Fort Sumter pendant. If you haven't seen the photo, of course it'll be up on the blog post for those of you listening, but there is a pendant hanging from a branch that is in the exact shape of Fort Sumter, and it has 3 different colored stripes on it, which some believe is the French flag. Is that correct, Brian?
That's what it looks like, although it could just be color indications or something.
Yeah. So, I mean, at first glance, it looks like red, white, and blue, which, of course, Fort Sumter, with all of its American history, that was my first interpretation, but further reading kind of shows that it's the French colors, and those colors are actually on a guide panel on Sullivan's Island.
What is your thinking of why the because I mean, when you first look at it, you get kind of this, Fort Sumter, kind of this calm thing, and then if you take another look at it, you realize that the mouth, quote unquote, is filled with teeth.
Yeah, and there's some people that there's an overhead view of some building, I believe on Sullivan's Island, that kind of shows almost the exact same kind of pattern if you look at it from an aerial point of view. But I have to stop and think, this book was written in 1982.
Yeah.
Google Maps wasn't around in 1982. So how did Byron Preiss actually come up with that? And is it a reach? again, there's a lot of things where I think the painting itself just leads the treasure hunter to the destination, like the overall city of where it's going to be. And I think it's really within the verse where it's a step-by-step guide. So Fort Sumter, we have the map of Charleston on the African mask on the forehead there. There's patterns of our freeways and highways. I think the paintings themselves just lead us directly to, here are the landmarks within that city, and here's where you're going to look, go find the verse.
Well, now we're into, and when you and I are out there doing the Stories in the Cemetery tour, we didn't maybe say this explicitly, but there's always this issue of signal versus noise, and how much is something a clue, and then the weight that you can give to that clue. And like you said, this could simply be an image that says, if you miss the peninsula, then Fort Sumter is that, where everything I've kind of seen is said, no, it's definitely more than that. It's actually Fort Sumter, or it's actually Fort Moultrie, or it's talking about this. And that's what's kind of tantalizing about the book in itself, is that you have to try to determine where the verses and the images are leading you, and not that they're being deceptive per se, but once you start going down the rabbit hole of it must mean this, you've got to have a bit of the some kind of rules of thumb that says, how much am I going to consider this, and how much weight am I going to put onto everything.
So, and that also goes with the theory of, like, every time I read a new interpretation of a verse, it's kind of like, maybe it could be that. Maybe, these folks are really doing their research just like we are. But I think we're taking everything at a different light, as we're not diving into each one as a specific clue, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, we're just not taking it as far and as deep as some of these other treasure hunters looking for this here in Charleston. And they're looking into other books, they're looking into literature references and the history of one specific person. I really don't think it's that deep and detailed. I think it's staring at us right in the face. And I think each clue in the verses you can see from the actual standing point of where these treasures are buried.
And I agree with that, but I've had this discussion as well, is that if you look in the right hand corner there, and there's that big shiny bauble, the minute we get to the level of, okay, let's our approach is going to be a little bit lighter or off the top, then you see the shiny bauble, and you start it's like a slippery slope. You're like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah,
maybe we should continue down this. And I think that's part of what the fascination is that whatever approach you take, the opposite approach starts. The minute you decide to go eat at a Mexican restaurant, your brain says, I kind of like Italian.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So let's get into the most commonly used verse, which I believe is the wrong verse. But I think there's some merit to what the history is behind all of this, and how people are going about this verse. So again, the verses don't match up to the picture. So it's not picture 1 goes with verse 1. So just as an explanation to the listeners. So most folks are using verse 6 to go with picture 2, which I think is pretty well established that picture 2 is Charleston. But here's how verse 6 goes, and we're kind of going to go through the gist of some of the clues that are the most common. So verse 6 reads, "Of all the romance retold, men of tales and tunes, cruel and bold, seen here by eyes of old, stand and listen to the birds, hear the cool, clear song of water, hearken to the words. Freedom at birth of a century, or May 1913. Edwin and Edwina named after him, or on the 8th a scene, where law defended, between two arms extended, below the bar that binds. Beside the long palm shadow, embedded in the sand, waits the fair remuneration, White House close at hand." So, guys, if you haven't seen this book, these are how these clues are put together. Like it's a jumble of words that make no sense until you start diving into it. So the first portion of this, the first 5 lines, are said to have been rewording from Treasure Island. It's a preface to the book by Robert Louis Stevenson. The full verse, and you can hear very similar things from the verse from Treasure Island. If sailor tales to sailor tunes, storm and adventure, heat and cold, if schooners, islands and maroons, and buccaneers and buried gold, and all the old romance, retold exactly in the ancient way, can please as me they pleased of old, the wiser youngsters of today. So you can see where the very similar phrases come from Byron's book to this preface to Treasure Island. Brian, what do you think about this? Is the literature actually matching up to you?
Well, and again, here's where the connective tissue starts to grow, in the sense of there is a very large granite marker which talks about the hanging of the pirates down on the battery. And then, so you've got that romance, and so you immediately, if you start with just a very basic connection of this verse is for this image with the lion and the peninsula on it, then it's hard not to go directly to that spot. And apparently that's where many treasure hunters have looked and gone over it and over it.
Well, for listeners that aren't in Charleston, the battery is located right next to or in White Point Gardens, and in the painting, there are many things that point right to White Point Gardens. There's a ferry with white pointed wings. What was the other? Oh, the on the pendant shows a clock hands pointing at 4 o'clock. Where on the 4, if you look at a map of Charleston, if you go down the peninsula, there's a white point at the edge of the hour hand. So another kind of clue that shows White Point, meaning White Point Gardens, which is where the battery is that Brian referred to. So
yeah, since I'm a tour guide, I did that the other day. I was saying something, just my classic one is, well, over there's MUSC, and people are like, what? That, and just because I'm there, I have the tendency just to call things out. Yeah, definitely. But the resonance of the picture, plus the Robert Louis Stevenson, plus the pirate issue, right there on the tip of the peninsula, immediately sends you in that direction to White Point Gardens.
And I just don't feel, I mean, I know our history of pirates here in Charleston is a huge part of our history and how things go. However, we have so many other wars that have happened here that I don't know that piracy would have been part of Byron Preiss' agenda for Charleston.
Right, and then that definitely gets you to the point of, it's not like Charleston has the only pirates in America, so you don't have to, you can move away from that.
Exactly. And I just don't feel strong enough about him wanting to put piracy and associate it with Charleston. And I know that we have monuments that show the time periods when piracy was a thing. I don't see it, and that's just my interpretation. And it's not because I'm so focused on verse 5. I just don't feel like he would have taken our pirate history, and said, we're going to make this part of the puzzle.
Well, yeah, but the other thing that gets me, and this is just because I ran across it for a total another tour that I was doing, is the whole Maine capstan issue in 1913. So again, it goes back to that. Well, yeah, pirates not so much in Charleston, and then it's like, oh, well, what about this then? If you don't think it's pirates, then what about this? And it's true, and it goes back to where you kind of have to start saying, and this must be weird as the time progresses, is that you do kind of have to say, well, wait a minute, this is 1982. And like, oh, well, look, I found this incredible image on Google Maps, and it's this sign, even whatever picture you're looking at. And you can't say, well, wait, there was no Google Maps in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
But the capstan is something that definitely intrigues me regarding this side of the verse, is if it's the right verse.
So let's talk about that for a second, because that was a
Yeah.
line that stumped me too. Now I'm skipping over some lines, listeners. The lines that I'm kind of skipping over: stand and listen to the birds, hear the cool clear song of water, hearken to the words, freedom at the birth of a century. Now, those 4 lines themselves could pretty much refer to anywhere that has any history to it too. I mean, let's face it. I mean, we could dive into those. I mean, we're near water. There's birds all the time. Hearken to the words. Like, the word hearken is spelled in a different English text, so it's Harken instead of Herken, which would have been written in Old English. But we're going to kind of skip over those just because May 1913, as Brian said, is a pretty big piece of Charleston history. So straight from thesecretpbworks.com, May 1913, this line is almost certainly a reference to the capstan from the USS Maine, which was given to the city of Charleston in May of 1913 and was on display in White Point Garden at the time The Secret was written. So
Right.
that's a huge marker in the verse. However, we can, like those lines that we skipped, do they really match up? There's not much that points to any of those things except for the freedom at the birth of a century. There was a lot of, I think there was, Brian, correct me here, wasn't there a speech that said something at the birth of a century that happened? I think it was with Denmark Vesey.
Well, there is a line on that, but that's 1822, so a little bit earlier than this. But and the other thing is that all of that would be up at the other side of the peninsula. You know, I just keep going back to, because you mentioned Robert Louis Stevenson, and you know he was, I think, Edinburgh or Scotland, and so just in that kind of like where we're kind of diagnosing how we break this down and how we immediately go to White Point Gardens. If you start with maybe it's the significances of the pirates, the significance is Robert Louis Stevenson, then that could be the marker that's getting you not only to that's getting you to a totally different image or a totally different location or Scotland or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, how do you it seems like this verse might not be the Charleston verse.
Okay, and that's fair. I mean, when I looked at the other ones that were actually solved, which were Cleveland, Chicago, and Boston,
Yeah.
the verses actually were a step-by-step guide on your starting point to your end point.
Okay.
I don't see how this verse is going to bring us to that, because everybody's referring a lot of the lines specifically to White Point Gardens instead of looking at it as either a starting point or end point. They're putting all of the lines together for White Point Gardens. It's almost like they found something to match each specific clue.
And this is one thing that you and I were doing, and maybe it's because we're tour guides and we're just used to point A to point B. But the image that I have when we're looking around the city is, you know, an old style treasure map with the little dashes and a little X marks the spot, and that these aren't clues to a location. They are indicators of cartographic movement and walking around. If they're not here, if you're in this location, you need to go here and then take this clue and go here. It's not telling a story. It's a more of a verbal map is that kind of,
again, a step-by-step guide direction on how to get somewhere.
Right, how to get somewhere, as opposed to where it is. It's how to get to the where. But that again puts in this whole, you know, there's in a lot of any games, there's always the meta game. There's the game on how you play the game, and that's the other rabbit hole here. Is once you start getting here, you're like, well, certainly other people have taken approaches to this, you know, rules of thumb, and then this is a whole other, and this is kind of why you know, you get kind of sucked into this, because it's like once you get there, then there's a whole other interpretation on like kind of where we've just reached here, which is how do you interpret the interpretation? And then you start saying, well, wait, where were the other successful hunts occurred? And so then you have to lay that level on. And now, simple verses become even a little bit more complex.
So I want to look at the next line, and this one baffled me. Like Edwin and Edwina named after him. So again, I'm going to read this straight from thesecret.pbworks.com just because it seems like they figured it out. I just don't see how this relates to Charleston directly. So it reads, this is likely a reference to a visit to Charleston by Edward Blyden in 1889. So we visit places all the time. Even back in the late 1800s, people still visited other places. It said the visit was described this way. In his search for converts to the colonizational cause, Blyden concentrated on Charleston with its large black population and important newspaper, the News and Courier, whose editors were sympathetic. Many in Charleston sought from Blyden news of the South Carolinians who had emigrated a dozen years before. He was enthusiastically welcomed. He even had twin babies named after him, Edwin and Edwina Wilmot Blyden, during his stay. So, again, it's a visit. I understand it was an important visit, but it was a visit to a large city in the late 1800s. Do you really think that Byron Preiss would have incorporated something like this into, that seems like a very small piece of our history to be able to dive into. So why wouldn't Edward Blyden, maybe his hometown, his home city, his home state, why wouldn't that be more of a factor for verse 6 to be placed on another city versus Charleston?
Yeah. And I think when we were briefly discussing that, I even threw out a whole different Edwin and Edwina that you were like, oh, I didn't know about that. So it's just like, again, though, if it could be something that is somehow a marker or a pointer to something, but that's the problem with this, is that once you get into, you're going along, you're like, you got pirates, you got 1913, and all of a sudden Edwin and Edwina show up, and that's when you start to go, oh, wait a minute here. Do you want to talk about now the idea that you could start at the bottom of this verse and read it backwards or move the verses around?
So, in theory, some of these verses can be rearranged in order for it to make a bit more sense and to be more of that step-by-step cartographical map where, you see the dotted lines because you took this line and you moved it to another line and you rearranged it so that it was more of the step-by-step guide versus this jumbled puzzle that you're trying to interpret each line individually.
Well, when you look at the other success stories, Boston, etc., has that been confirmed from people who have actually been able to locate the treasure?
I want to say that the Chicago, perhaps it was Cleveland, don't quote me, but one of them, you can rearrange the lines in a specific order, and it's a step-by-step guide from here to there. Plain and simple. Again, I love that theory because these puzzles are very jumbled, as you can see and as listeners can hear. Each line could be considered a clue, or they could be couplets. As an English guy, I'm looking at this in a poetic form, going, this line doesn't really match up linguistically with the next line or the previous line.
And that immediately gets us to, and I think this is the one when we first discussed this, the between two arms extended.
Yes.
What? like now it's like you're like, oh yeah, definitely I'm going to head down to White Point Gardens, and then there's a couple of sculptures there. There's some bust, and there's even the war memorials there, but they don't look anything like two arms extended. Oh, I know where it is. And this gets back into the thing, is that some people have claimed that those two arms extended are referring to the sides of the capstan.
Correct.
Which, again, that seems is it just visual? I mean, at one point, where does arms be arms? An arm is an arm and is an arm. Or arms, the word is a symbolic reference to something that resembles arms.
Correct. So it's the matter of interpretation between two arms extended. So those arms, whether they're human arms or whether they're weaponry arms, they have to be extended from something.
Right.
So that's how I took that. It could be somebody literally extending their arm, and there are two statues in White Point Gardens that do that, but in the opposite effect.
Right, but you've seen the picture of the capstan with the arms extended on the capstan are the the locations or the what holds the rope. I mean, that's what the capstan does, right? You're going to wrap it around and keep things solid there. So, I mean, you can't disagree with that interpretation if you're willing to qualify arms as symbolic of whatever looks like an arm, right. Or if you go the hard school route, which is no, arms is arms. I have to admit, every time I see it, I just have a picture of, Jesus on the cross, and which leads me to a whole other point of analysis. Maybe this is talking about either a specific statue of a person or maybe a church or something.
It could be. I didn't even think of a church.
I
didn't even put that reference together because arms to me, as you're teaching more history to me about the city of Charleston, I think of weaponry and cannons, and those are arms to me because it's armory. It's that type of term, that definition of arms.
But why would they be extended? Are you saying that the weaponry was extended out in battle usage, or
yes.
Or it's just and then there's also this back and forth of it's actually saying arms extended, and it's a visual clue of something as opposed to a symbolic reference to something. And this gets into which almost when you go through and just read any verse, it's like you're getting, oh wait, hey, this could be this could be this, and then all of a sudden there's these almost 180-degree turns where the edifice that you've built up, the foundation you have, suddenly just gets kind of blindsided.
Yeah. And it even goes to one of the other lines that says, beside the long palm's shadow.
Mm-hmm.
So palm, we know here in Charleston in South Carolina, we have palmetto trees. So is it literally a palm of a hand, or is it the shadow of a palm tree or a palmetto tree?
Right. And then again, when you go down and it's embedded in the sand, so palmetto trees embedded in the sand is definitely the battle with Sergeant Jasper and Colonel Moultrie at Sullivan's Island against the British.
Right.
And then you say, well, wait a minute, maybe we were right, and it is it's again one of those things where like, oh, it's the statue of Colonel Moultrie.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh no, because that's where the capstan was that they took out. But there's definitely the other, which I guess now, since we kind of moved away from this verse, but there's actually the statue of Sergeant Jesper with the because he picked up the cannon fuselage and wrapped the flag around it,
mm-hmm.
and his arms maybe not extend. Well, it depends on how wide you want to be extended, but you could argue that his arms are extended because he's got the quote unquote flagpole in one of his hands, so that
right.
can be a direct reference to that particular statue.
Correct. And I most of the research points right to the Sergeant Jasper statue, just because it's in White Point Gardens. So
right.
But again, there's a lot of clues here. There's a lot of different interpretations of every single line, and
right.
Reaching and digging through Charleston history, which, let's face it, nobody can hold enough textbooks on the history here. It almost feels like everything here is a direct reach, and you and I have looked into this one as well as the next verse that we're going to discuss real quick. But yeah. I don't feel strongly enough about verse 6 after reading all of the different interpretations of the lines and even some of the proof that's there. I just don't see how this is the verse for Charleston. So have you looked into James Wachowski's study for verse 5?
You read it through, and again, he's telling the story of the discussion we're having here that went on with his mind, and then he's even got comments saying, I can't get to it or there. But as you're reading it, it does the same thing that we're doing here, which is makes sense. He kind of must be right. So it's it's the same. It's almost infuriating in that you see the exact same process going on, but in a totally different starting point.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So Wachowski's theory is that the treasure is buried on Sullivan's Island. He claims he figured this out through verse 5, and I will read that here shortly, but he actually, on his blog, he posted some pictures that he took from Sullivan's Island and how some of the lines from verse 5 make sense. And one of the pictures is a Liberian wooden mask that looks very similar, at least in reference, to the mask that's in the painting.
Mm-hmm.
What's nice about verse 5 is that it's a little shorter than verse 6. The lines are a little tighter. And a lot of people steer away from this just because of the word citadel being right smack in the middle of the verse, and they're claiming that it would be too easy to add citadel to Charleston, and Byron Preiss did not want this puzzle to be that easy. I tend to disagree. He honestly thought that all 12 of these would have been solved within the first year or two of the publication of the book. Never in his wildest dreams did he think that this would last over 35 years.
Yeah, and it's like it's almost like it could be describing a street, and on that street there's a big metal sign in the shape of a U, mm-hmm. and in the verse it says, "U is the sign," and right. Your immediate thing is, "Oh, it must be the street," and then again that rabbit hole that we keep going into is like, well, he wouldn't have been that obvious. It's got to be, maybe you take a U-turn, or maybe it's, and that's where, and I guess I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about this because, like we talked about at the beginning, where I kind of randomly came across this, but I think that there's an element of just the human mind consciousness to just as infuriating as this and even talking about this now, it's just fun,
That's true. That's the reason why we're doing it. And let's face it, I mean, the treasure itself, we didn't really explain what the treasure is. So the treasure is a plexiglass box buried 3 to 4 feet in the ground that holds a cask that's completely non-metal, so you can't find it with a metal detector, and inside bears a key, and each painting holds on to a certain gemstone. Now, on the picture for Charleston, there's a diamond. It is said that the more expensive that the gemstone is, the harder the puzzle will be. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, with a diamond being probably one of the more expensive jewels or gemstones, I'd expect a little bit more of a puzzle within a puzzle, but I think that there are very obvious clues. I think that the picture is an obvious clue. Like, here it is. It's Charleston.
And that definitely the wealth or the value of the gemstone. Then when you start saying things like, well, maybe this is a more obscure reference, or maybe these verses have been moved around, it's like that's the well, I was saying we enjoy doing this just sort of puzzle. We like to figure things out. But when you get frustrated and you're like, well, and then of course you reach out onto the web and you have all these interpretations, and then it's kind of like, I'm just not going to mess with this anymore. And then the kind of the kicker is that big shiny bauble at the end. It's like, well, wait a minute, this isn't just. I think when you're going through the verses, you're like, oh, I want this I just want to finish this just to finish this for my own thing. And then when you get frustrated, you want to quit, then that beautiful gemstones as well. Wait a minute, there's more to this than just my own intellectual curiosity being cured. It's this actual, there's a diamond buried somewhere. And so and then it's like, okay, let's start at the beginning and do it one more time.
So to me, I mean, for me, really, it's not about the diamond. It's not about like the actual treasure. Sorry, Byron and Emily feel like they want to fight right now. My listeners are used to hearing their dog collars in the background, in case you were wondering.
Sure, jingle, jingle.
Right. So, all right, guys, go fight somewhere else. Edit. But it's really about me being able to figure this out, because it's pretty much what I do for a living. I take all the clues from, paranormal research equipment, and I put together the history based on the clues that I get. This is just a bigger piece, like just a bigger style of a puzzle. It's like doing a 250 word, piece puzzle every day, and then all of a sudden you get a 2,000 piece. That's what this is to me. It's more about figuring it out and finding the cask and key. And as far as the diamond goes, like, that's just a trophy.
Yeah. Well, for me, the frustration level, I get caught up in the whole signal versus noise. And that's even, even just my day-to-day life is like, oh, should I choose A or B? Or like, like me, here we are talking about grand philosophical theories, and my basic description is, I want to go get Mexican food, and I'm driving to the Mexican food restaurant. And then my brain's like, or you see like an Italian restaurant, and it's like, I've made this decision. I'm going with it, but now it's no longer as pleasant because of this other alternative. And then how do you decide that? But I have to admit, I'm kind of the diamond. It's again, if it was maybe, and the idea here is that it's a specific gym for a specific month, right?
Correct. Brian, I don't know if you knew this, but if you actually look at the clock on the pendant, it actually points to 4 o'clock, which 4 being the 4th month of the year, and the gemstone for April, which is the 4th month, is a diamond. So the other ones have already depicted that too, which is, to me, the zodiac is always a clue to something, but that was just kind of like a neat little Easter egg inside of the whole concept of the painting.
Right.
So,
and then it kind of, we got it kind of again. As we keep going back forth between, is it literal things and metaphorical things? It definitely is doing that. But what if it's actually a pointer, or it's more of a cardinal pointer or something? And in that regard, what kind of gets me, since we're kind of back on the image, is we talked about the tree branch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's hard because if you start at the the lion and you see the peninsula and the mast, then you've got to get down to the second part of the image, and then that's when it's just, you almost start to wonder if you're even in the right city, with the golden pear and the daisy. And then from what I understand, there's something about the fairies.
Yeah, the fairies, with the other solves so far, Cleveland, Boston, Chicago, the fairy has been depicted in a statue in some way, shape, or form in or around that city. And I want to say it was the Boston one, where it was somebody famous, like it was a majorly famous historic person, but it was the face that matched up almost identical to the face in the painting for Boston. I don't know it off the top of my head because I watched the episode of that TV show that revealed everything for Boston weeks ago. But I was actually diving into the fairy for the Charleston image, and even looking at like her formation, and her hands are underneath her chin as if she might be laying down. I spent, I don't know how many days looking into statues around Charleston that might be even close to the form that she's in. But I believe you already mentioned that arms extended from verse 6 could be even Jesus on the cross. So, that to me is very interesting, because we have a ton of churches here in Charleston. So what's your take on the crosses?
Hey, you're trying to get me off the butterfly ferry here, which my brain is burning on because I wanted to tell you a short story. At some point, the licensing program in Charleston, you actually got on a bus and people pointed at things and
Mm-hmm.
then, okay, talk about this now. And so I was talking to a young woman. At this point, she'd been a tour guide for a while, but she said the first time she took the test, there were some older women, kind of from the older historical preservation movement, and she said, "Oh, this is the place we're talking about, going to, and it's kind of known as the Charleston Beach because all of the uh, young women, especially, like during the summer, the spring and summer, like to lay out in their bikinis all along that area."
Wow.
Yeah. So again, I'm looking at this going, wait a minute, that's a bikini, and she's laying down. Are all the fairies butterfly shaped, or does that just
Well, all the fairies have wings. I don't know that the wings are butterfly shaped, so to speak, or even have the butterfly pattern, with them. And I have the book, so just looking, like some of the fairies, like I don't even see the fairy on that one. Um, but again, like to me, the fairies represent a statue of some sort. So I haven't
well,
found that piece of it yet.
yeah, I'm just because to me, I get such a butterfly image here that I almost want to, whatever, lapidotry or something. I want to, like, maybe there's a clue in just the shape of the butterfly, or as well as, and we haven't gone into this either. Like, I can't really tell anything that's in the image on the butterfly, but it is kind of weird that there's those circles,
Mm-hmm.
like that. And so there's that, and then of course there's the whole issue with, and I've seen something about what the golden pair represents, but that throws me every time I look at this image.
So I've kind of analyzed the fairy wings. If we can talk about that for a second, do you
Oh,
have a
sure.
picture of it in front of you?
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture. That's why I was kind of obsessing on it.
Okay, so if you look at the two top wings and the blue outline that goes into the white tips, like the white edges,
Uh-huh.
those to me look like church steeples.
Okay.
Do you see that? They're a
Are you
little
talking?
they're a little distorted,
Yeah.
like a little wavy, like they're in water.
Are you talking like up on the top?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So
I keep seeing coastal outline in there as well, and then almost like there's scales and it's almost fish-like or something.
I look at that as cobblestone.
Oh, I
So
like that idea.
see, even all of the little clues that we've found, individually, we still haven't discussed everything. As you can see, we're
Yeah.
doing it right here live.
And the circles are cannons.
Yeah, that's what it is said. I'm not seeing it as cannons, but I don't know what that is. I just don't see cannons when I look at those. I just really don't. I know that the argument is that the white center of the cannon has been filled in with cement, and that's why it's depicted that way in the painting. But again, I just don't see it that way. And again, I haven't focused too much on the painting just because to me, I just want to find certain things that are in the image when I'm standing at the location that I think that it's at. And I have found quite
Well,
a few.
I actually, oddly enough, that's actually where I was putting. I guess we can admit. I mean, we've said Citadel, so I mean, the cat's out of the bag. I don't know if you want to edit that, but there's just as much reference to cannons at the Citadel as there is at White Point Gardens.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So let's talk about Wachowski for a second.
Yeah.
Wachowski, his theory is pretty. His research is phenomenal. So for those of you that are going to dive into this, I'm going to put the link in the show notes, and it's also on the blog. But his blog post on his research is absolutely tip top, and it kind of gave me a lot of inspiration to dive into this theory of mine and how to go about it. So if we haven't said it before, you do need to research how other people have dove into this, but just understand that if you're diving into a cask that hasn't been found yet, there's a reason why it hasn't been found yet, because the theory that you're looking at is wrong. Or in Wachowski's case, illegal. So
Right.
he is claiming that it is next to a monument on Sullivan's Island. Let me find the name of that monument again.
Is it the Alawal? Um, the Native American grave?
No, it is actually the USS Patapsco Monument Obelisk with the Fort Sally Port. That's actually right behind it. So
Okay.
there's a tree that was there during 1982. The photo that he has is from 1977. But apparently, and I'm going to give everybody a bit of advice. If you're looking for the Charleston, cask and treasure, it is you're just going to be annoying the folks at Fort Moultrie if you just keep asking, because since Wachowski's research has come out, everybody has gone to that location, investigating, backing up his research, and asking if they can dig. You cannot dig there. It is a national park.
Right.
And it's going to be a small act of the gods in order for anybody to put a shovel to that ground. And I believe that he's even asked for GPR, ground penetrating radar. And I believe that is still up in the air of if he's even allowed to do that, which does not disturb the ground at all.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's what we talked about in our solution, is that you could argue that there's private clubs or organizations which are actually the owners of the land, and you could theorize at least how some letter or discussion or sit down or payment was made saying somewhere in the future these people are going to come and they're going to give you a location on this property where they want to dig, and you should do the following when that occurs, which is still kind of tenuous, but at least it's better than, oh, I'm just going to go dig on federal grounds and I hope I don't end up in federal prison.
Right. And again, my theory is that there's no way Preiss would have been there with a shovel, even in the middle of the night. He would have been caught, the ground would have been disturbed, and it would have been who did this, and they would have found him. And,
yeah, they would.
And even your theory of somewhere in the future, his anticipation with that all 12 puzzles would have been solved within the first year or two. This was just a marketing scheme to sell more books.
Yeah.
So, and it's a print-on-demand book, I might add. So
right.
It's not easily obtainable.
Everything's a gimmick.
Yeah, always. But, so, I'm going to argue the fact that verse 5 makes way more sense than verse 6 for the Charleston painting. And I think that you will agree, after you've looked at some of my research and the locations that we're looking at.
Right.
I think our next step is to actually get a soil probe. And we haven't discussed the get permission to dig out, which is the last two lines, as said a warning not to dig somewhere. But again, how was he able to do it? So what's your take on the permission piece?
Yeah, well, I was right when we were doing that. I had this thought. I think we got off on something else when we were there on the spot. But again, it goes back into and I think this is part of what makes our hunt team good, is that I'm always looking at it from this vast philosophical signal versus noise thing, where you keep me grounded and like, okay, but 12 paces like that. But I did kind of have that idea that get permission to dig. It's such a sentence. It's so obvious that we haven't even discussed the fact that it's that in itself is metaphorical. It's referencing maybe some historical event. It's referencing maybe when the Wells were there. It's maybe a person who was famous in Charleston for wanting to do that. So that could actually be just another clue as opposed to a directive.
So going with my rearranged theory, do you think maybe we should rework my triplets and couplets to get permission in another portion of the verse?
I think that's one of the areas that you could definitely, if you take that kind of follow that through, then I think you could definitely move it around, or at least consider moving around. I guess I was kind of, there's a specific image in the image. There's a specific image that is in the physical place we've been looking at, which I guess we'll keep hidden. But I'm sure those astute among the hunters out there will find. Mm-hmm. But when you pointed it at, I was like, whoa. I mean, I kind of see me and myself as the Scully to your Mulder sometimes. But,
we're not geeking out right now, not at all.
That's what I was like. Wait, Mulder may be onto something. So yeah.
So, I think with what we have to do next, which is obviously rearrange some lines, look at these lines a little bit deeper, I think I'm really onto something with my English background of rearranging the verse.
Yeah. Well, don't forget that I sent you those pictures where I have no problem with our garden probe plan as well, just because of you saw the same thing that I saw in the area that we were looking, and I think that might be a worth checking out. And I also think that the looking at the previous solutions, like we talked about the face on the ferry in the Boston picture, is almost maybe take everything we have, set it aside, and just start from with the let's not reinvent the wheel. What worked? What worked here? What worked in Cleveland? What worked in Boston? And instead of saying, well, this reminds me of what the ferry says, just write down, just point blank, what the solution was for those people, and then go back to the research.
Okay, and that's fair. And I don't think that this is going to be something we're going to find like next week. This is going to be an ongoing thing for us. I mean, let's face it, it's buried. It's been 45 years. It's not going anywhere, unless, of course, somebody figures out all of our clues and goes and digs it up before us. But at the same token, I think we're really onto something here. I think verse 6 is definitely wrong, and I'm just going to put that out there. No offense to anybody who's researched it. Great job on your research and putting clues together. I commend you. But I really think that verse 5 is where it's sitting. And I believe most of the other blogs and other posts about verse 5 link it to Montreal. So that might rearrange some patterns a little bit if in the event you and I find this and it was because of verse 5.
Yeah, and then, of course, that would be, again, just throwing out these rules of thumb or strategies is to let's take that as given and let's go to that Montreal, with Google Maps or whatever, and see how much of this feeling of connectivity and connective tissue happens if we kind of dive into that a little bit. I have to say that as much as I like the kind of the game theory aspect of all this, going in and reading everybody's research and blog post is, it's like reading a good nonfiction book. If anything, it's just interesting to see, oh, wow, I didn't know that about, like, for example, the trip of Edwin in the 1890s. I didn't know that. So it's just, there's that whole aspect of this is just kind of, as much as it's fun, it's just kind of entertaining as well. Even the blog about the Sullivan's Island is really cool to read over.
Absolutely. So I think we need to wrap this up. I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about Charleston Cavalier Tours for a second and the folks that we're looking for to kind of join our team.
Definitely. Well, and you can kind of see just from, Nick and I's podcast here is we like to get kind of dig in the dirt a little bit and express that, and making those connections as you bring that forward is what makes a great story. It's what makes something interesting. And that's kind of the mission statement of Cavalier Tours, is to bring in people who have a passion or a great fan or have researched a particular subject, or maybe they are, imagine somebody who's done leather work. Maybe we could go around and talk about leather in the city of Charleston and the whole like that. And that's just a wild example, but it definitely, right now, everyone's so inundated with information that it's more about connectivity and context and bringing that to life than it is just about, well, this is the correct fact and this is what happened. And that's one of the reasons I've done some tours out of the norm. Like I was do some tours up above Calhoun Street. And when I kind of had that going, and then when Nick and I first started talking, he brought in, his interest. And I mean, he's written 7 books. He's an author. He investigates the paranormal in a very scientific way. And so he was kind of the manifestation of that exact kind of mission statement. And that's what's been pretty exciting as we move forward. Not only is Nick getting some traction on his tours, but we're already starting to see people coming in like, hey, I'm really interested in dueling, or I'm really interested in women's history. And so that's the kind of thing that's really exciting with Charleston Cavalier Tours, is because we're kind of bringing it a little bit different take on tours and the way they've been done in Charleston for a while here.
Nice. So, folks, if you actually live in Charleston and you're looking for a side gig or just something fun to do, and you have a niche market, like what we're talking about, either like leather, culinary, any of those type of things, give us a shout. Go to charlestoncavaliertours.com, or if you're about to visit Charleston, make sure you head over to the website and you book a tour, and who knows, they might change up. I'm actually very interested to take this dueling tour of the gentleman we just picked up. So again, that's only going to enhance my tours because I do add some of the duels through my tours and experience. But Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm planning on doing this once a month, so if you're game, I think we need to kind of reveal things little by little. And who knows, this might be a Buy Me a Coffee exclusive to do episodes strictly through those patrons and sponsors for the show. So Brian, thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll do this again next month.
Let's do it, man. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to today's Story in a Cemetery. Be sure to check out the show notes with pictures and bonus audio sections on nicholasmcgurr.com. As you know, I'm a writer, and now you have another story that inspires me to write my fiction works. Be sure to share this episode on your social media or leave me comments on the Stories in the Cemetery Facebook page. I'll see you next time with another Story in the Cemetery.